Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and I want you to imagine pulling into work at like 7:30 in the morning.
Glad to be here. And yes, 7:30 a.m., the parking lot is mostly empty, the air is still crisp.
Right, you're just trying to mentally prepare for the day. But there, sitting squarely in your reserved spot, is a gleaming crimson Mercedes.
Ooh, that is never a good sign.
No, it is not. You check the license plate, and it reads number 1. You know exactly whose car that is.
The division vice president.
Exactly. It belongs to the VP. And he's not there for a friendly early morning chat over coffee.
Definitely not. He's waiting there to tell you that your manufacturing plant is just bleeding money.
Right. And he drops a total bomb. You have exactly 3 months to turn the entire operation around.
The 3 months, or else...
Or else 600 people lose their jobs and the doors close for good.
Man, that is the ultimate cold sweat, high stakes wake up call for anyone in management.
It really is. And that's the exact situation a guy named Alex Rogo finds himself in. He manages this failing manufacturing plant.
Which is the core story of today's source material, right?
Yes, exactly. Today, we are going to use his crisis, which is famously documented in Eli Goldratt's revolutionary book, the goal to basically expose the hidden fatal flaws in how all of us work.
And we should clarify, this isn't just some dry academic textbook about factory operations.
Not at all. Goldratt actually wrote it as a novel.
Yeah, he uses this narrative and the Socratic method to completely dismantle the assumptions we make about productivity.
And honestly, even though the setting is a 1980s manufacturing plant, the lessons are just uncomfortably relevant to literally any system you might be working in today.
Oh, totally. We're going to decode why feeling busy rarely equals actually being productive.
Right, and we'll look at the hidden mathematical forces that cause massive bottlenecks in your projects.
So whether you are running a factory floor, managing a team of software developers, or honestly just trying to organize your own chaotic life, this deep dive is for you.
Absolutely. So we need to figure out why Alex's plant is failing. Because when he walks into the building after seeing that crimson Mercedes, the place is just in absolute chaos.
Complete panic mode.
Yeah. Expediters are screaming at each other. The union steward is threatening a walkout. And a master machinist named Tony literally throws down his wrench and quits on the spot.
Which is a huge disaster, right? Because Tony is the guy who runs their most expensive, vital piece of equipment.
Yeah, the NCX10 machine.
Yeah.
But you have to look at why Tony actually quit.
Right, because the VP, Bill Peach, is throwing a massive tantrum over one specific delayed order, customer order 41427.
Yes. To get this one late order out the door, management essentially forces Tony to abandon a super complex hour-and-a-half setup on that NCX10 machine.
Just to rush a missing part for this one single order?
Exactly. I mean, it takes him 90 minutes just to calibrate the machine for a massive run of parts, and they tell him, drop it, tear down the setup, and run a single piece.
It's just localized panic, and it destroys the overall flow of the entire factory.
It does. But this introduces the central paradox of Alex's plan. And honestly, the paradox of so many modern businesses.
Right, because if you looked at their operations on paper, you would think they were an absolute powerhouse.
Oh, totally. They have these state-of-the-art robots. They have incredible utilization rates. Everyone is always working.
Yeah, if you walk the floor, nobody is just standing around idle.
Yet they are hemorrhaging cash. They are constantly missing shipping deadlines.
Which feels completely counterintuitive, right?
It really does. I mean, think about it like a beautifully choreographed football team where everyone runs their routes with absolute perfection, but they just never actually score.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
Right.
Like if a team is working at 90% efficiency, how do they end up being a total disaster?
Well, it's because of a trap called the local optimum.
Meaning you're optimizing just one small piece of the puzzle.
Yes, exactly. And you're doing so without considering the whole system. Keeping people and machines busy just for the sake of keeping them busy is not just neutral, it is actively destructive.
Wow. Actively destructive.
Yeah, because the management at this plant was entirely blinded by traditional cost accounting metrics.
Right. They thought, hey, we paid millions for these expensive robots and workers, so they must be running and producing parts 100% of the time to justify their cost.
But they were making parts they didn't actually have orders for.
Yeah, they were just aggressively building a massive pile of metal that nobody needed yet.
So they were highly efficient at doing the completely wrong thing. It tied up all their cash and raw materials and completely clogged the factory floor.
Which is just crazy. So to understand why those traditional efficiency metrics are lying to us, We have to look at a chance encounter Alex has outside the factory.
Right, he goes to a conference.
Yeah, and while waiting in an airport lounge at Chicago O'Hare, he runs into his old physics professor, a guy named Jonah.
Jonah is essentially the Yoda of this story.
He really is.
Yeah.
Alex sits down and starts, bragging to Jonah about his fancy new robots, telling him they improved efficiency by 36% in one department.
And Jonah just systematically dismantles Alex's pride with 3 simple questions.
Right. He asks him, did your plant sell more products?
And Alex thinks about it and says, well, no, sales are flat.
So Jonah asks, did you lay anyone off, reducing your overall headcount?
No.
Did your inventories go down?
Again, no.
So Jonah just looks at him and points out that if sales didn't go up, costs didn't go down, and inventory didn't shrink, then Alex didn't increase productivity at all.
Right, the robots just made the plant faster at failing.
Faster at failing. That completely crushes Alex. He realizes he actually has, no idea what productivity even means.
Which forces him to ask a much bigger question.
Yeah. Later on, he decides to skip this really boring corporate meeting. He buys a pizza and a 6-pack of beer, sits on a hillside overlooking his plant, and just tries to figure out the fundamental purpose of the business.
He runs through all the standard corporate buzzwords we hear every single day.
Right. Is the goal to have cost-effective purchasing?
Well, no, because you could just buy a mountain of cheap materials you don't need.
Is it to provide jobs?
I mean, companies lay people off all the time.
Is it to produce quality products, capture market share, develop new technology?
And sure, those are all important components, but they're just means to an end.
Exactly. Alex finally realizes that the true goal of a manufacturing organization, or really any for-profit business, is singular. It is to make money.
To make money.
Now, when I first read that, my immediate reaction was, that making money sounds a bit cynical.
I get that.
Right? What about customer satisfaction? What about building something of high quality that actually helps people?
But consider what happens if you have the highest quality product in the world and your customers are thrilled, but you consistently spend more than you earn.
Well, you go bankrupt, and then you can't help anyone at all.
Exactly. The founder of the company didn't build that factory just out of a charitable love for appliances.
Right.
The goal provides a true north here. An action is only productive if it moves the entire system toward making money.
If it doesn't, it is non-productive no matter how incredibly busy it makes you look. It's kind of like the wheels in the engine of a car. Quality, efficiency, customer service, those are the wheels in the engine. You absolutely need them, or the car is useless.
Yeah.
But making money is the gas. Without fuel, the vehicle just sits in the driveway.
That is a perfect analogy. Think about how this applies to your own life or your own workday.
Right.
How often do you optimize a process or spend 3 hours beautifully organizing a spreadsheet without asking if it actually moves you closer to your ultimate goal?
Oh, we've all done that. You spend a whole week building a stunning slide deck for a project, only to find out the meeting was canceled.
Yep.
You were 100% efficient at building the deck, but your actual productivity was 0.
Exactly. But here's the major challenge. Making money is a boardroom concept.
Right.
If you walk onto the factory floor and tell a shift supervisor, hey, your new job is to make more money, they won't have a clue what to do. They operate on quotas, scrap factors, and machine times.
That disconnect is exactly why Jonah gives Alex 3 radical new measurements during a late-night phone call.
Yes.
These aren't standard accounting terms. They are designed to translate the abstract goal of making money into daily operational rules that anyone can understand.
And the first metric is throughput.
Right.
And Jonah's definition is extremely specific here. He defines throughput as the rate at which the system generates money through sales.
Through sales, not through production.
Exactly. If you build a television and it sits in a warehouse for 6 months, that is not throughput. It only becomes throughput when a customer actually pays for it.
The second metric is inventory. And Jonah defines this as all the money the system has invested in purchasing things it intends to sell.
And the third is operational expense.
Right.
This is all the money the system spends in order to turn that inventory into throughput.
So just to summarize, basically, throughput is money coming in. Inventory is money currently stuck inside the system. And operational expense is the money you have to constantly pay out, like rent, electricity, and salaries to make the throughput happen.
Precisely. And when Alex and his team, his controller Lou and his inventory manager Stacy, when they start looking at their plant through the lens of these three specific metrics,
Oh man, they have a horrifying realization about those state-of-the-art robots.
they really do. They realize the robots were actually destroying the company.
Yeah, because management wanted to justify the multi-million-dollar cost of these machines. So to keep the efficiencies high on paper, they just kept feeding the robots more and more raw materials.
The robots were churning out parts at lightning speed,
Right.
but those parts couldn't be assembled into finished products because they were always waiting on other slower components to catch up.
So they just built up this massive surplus of robotic parts without any matching customer orders.
Yep. Inventory skyrocketed because all their cash was suddenly tied up in piles of metal sitting on the floor.
And operational expense went up because they had to pay people to move and store all this excess stuff.
Exactly. And throughput stayed completely flat because they weren't actually shipping any finished products.
They were moving in the exact opposite direction of the goal, all while literally congratulating themselves on how efficient the robots were.
It's wild. And this brings us to one of the most controversial concepts in the book, how we define the value of inventory.
Yes, this part blew my mind. Jonah insists that the value of direct labor should not be counted as part of the value of inventory.
Which breaks every single rule of traditional cost accounting.
It really does. The traditional view says that if I buy $1 worth of raw metal and I pay a worker $10 to process it, that piece of metal sitting in my warehouse is now an asset worth $11.
But that creates a massive trap.
It does. Because it implies that if I spend like 10 hours meticulously polishing a random rock I found in my driveway, that rock is now a highly valuable asset on my balance sheet. But if no one ever dyes the rock, my 10 hours aren't an asset. They are a sunk cost. It's a complete illusion of profit.
It really is. By treating labor as value added to inventory, traditional accounting creates a truly perverse incentive for floor managers.
How so?
Well, on paper, building up inventory looks like you are increasing the company's assets. It makes the manager look great this quarter.
Oh, I see.
But in reality, you are actively burning cash to build piles of stuff that isn't generating any throughput. You are suffocating the business just to make the spreadsheet look good.
Wow. So Alex and his team finally grasp this concept. They understand the metrics.
Yeah.
But, grasping the math in a quiet office is very different from understanding why systems break down in the messy real world.
Totally.
Why does inventory constantly pile up? Why does throughput drop even when everyone is working really hard?
He's figured that out. We have to leave the factory completely.
We head into the woods. Alex gets roped into leading his son Dave's Boy Scout troop on a weekend hike to a place called Devil's Gulch.
A classic dad situation.
Truly. So he's marching at the back of the line, watching this group of kids walk single file down a trail. And he notices something strange.
Right. Even though everyone is walking at roughly the same average pace, the line of boys keeps spreading out.
Yeah, the gaps between the kids keep getting wider and wider.
He's watching two universal phenomena play out in real time. Jonah called them dependent events and statistical fluctuations.
Dependent events just means one thing has to happen before another thing can. It's a sequence.
Right. Kid B cannot walk a specific section of the trail until Kid A has walked it first. The flow is dependent.
And statistical fluctuations refer to the natural variations that exist in any process.
Exactly. You might average 2 miles an hour on a hike, but you don't walk at a perfectly robotic speed.
Right. Sometimes you take a faster step. Sometimes you stumble over a root. Sometimes you stop for 5 seconds to adjust your backpack straps.
Now, human intuition and honestly traditional management theory tells us that over a long enough timeline, those fluctuations should just average out.
Right. Like if a kid slows down to adjust his backpack, he'll just naturally speed up a few seconds later to close the gap, and the line will stay tight.
But Alex realizes that isn't what happens at all. The line just keeps getting longer.
To figure out why our intuition is so wrong here, Alex invents this brilliant game when the troop stops for lunch.
Yes, the matchstick game.
He uses a pair of dice, some matchsticks, and the kids' aluminum mess kit bowls.
Right. He sets up a line of bowls, one for each kid. The matches represent inventory-like raw materials moving through a factory.
And the dice roll represents the capacity of each kid to process that inventory on their turn.
Exactly.
Okay, so he uses a single die. That means the capacity for each kid fluctuates randomly between 1 and 6 matches per turn.
Yeah, and the average roll of a die is 3.5.
So in a perfectly balanced system where capacity perfectly equals market demand, they should be able to move an average of 3.5 matches through the entire line of bowls every single turn.
They play the game for 10 rounds. Mathematically, 10 rounds times an average of 3.5 matches means they should output 35 matches at the very end of the line.
But they don't even come close.
Not at all.
They only output 20 matches. And worse, the inventory, the matches waiting in the bowls, starts piling up in massive waves in the middle of the line. The system falls completely, hopelessly behind.
And that's because of a mathematical rule dictating how variations behave in a sequence. Basically, in a chain of dependent events, your maximum speed is entirely hostage to whoever is right in front of you.
Wait, let me make sure I get this. If the kid in front of you rolls a 1 and you roll a 6, you can still only process one match because he only passed you one match.
Exactly. Your extra capacity of 5 is completely lost into the void. You can't, bank it for later.
Oh, wow.
But consider the reverse. If you roll a 1 and the kid in front of you rolls a 6, you process one match and the other 5 matches sit in your bowl as a pileup, as excess inventory.
So the gains from positive fluctuations are restricted by the system, but the negative fluctuations accumulate.
Yes. Speed does not accumulate. Slowness does.
That is profound. It's the exact same dynamic as highway traffic.
Oh, it's identical.
Think about a busy highway where everyone is driving 65 miles an hour. One driver lightly taps their brakes because, they thought they saw a cop.
Right.
The person behind them overreacts and brakes a little harder. The person behind them slams on the brakes. 3 miles back, traffic comes to a dead, grinding halt.
Exactly. The slowness accumulates and ripples backward. But you can never go faster than the car directly in front of you.
Which leads Alex to a pretty game-changing conclusion.
It does. He realizes that trying to run a perfectly balanced plant where you trim the capacity of every single machine to exactly match market demand is basically a mathematical guarantee of bankruptcy.
Wow.
Yeah, if you do that, dependent events and statistical fluctuations will inevitably drive your throughput down and your inventory will just pile up.
You literally cannot balance a system perfectly. So how does Alex fix the Boy Scout hike? How does he actually get them to Devil's Gulch on time?
Well, he has to look at the entire system and locate the constraint.
The slowest point.
Right. In this case, it's the slowest kid in the troop, a boy named Herbie.
Poor Herbie. He is struggling, he's red-faced, he's falling behind, and it turns out he's carrying a massive, heavy backpack filled with canned goods.
So Alex makes a totally counterintuitive move. He puts Herbie at the very front of the line.
Which sounds completely crazy. You're taking your slowest asset and letting it dictate the pace of the entire operation.
But the thing is, Herbie was already dictating the pace of the entire operation.
Oh, right, because slowness accumulates?
Exactly. He is the constraint. By putting him at the front, the line physically cannot spread out anymore. No one can walk faster than Herbie.
So the gaps between the kids, which represent inventory, shrink and stabilize.
Yes. But Alex doesn't stop there. He takes the heavy cans out of Herbie's backpack and distributes them among the faster kids.
He elevates the capacity of the constraint.
Bingo. By taking the weight off Herbie, Herbie naturally speeds up. And because Herbie is at the front, the entire troop speeds up and arrives at their destination on time.
That right there is the absolute essence of the goal. You cannot optimize a complex system by looking at local efficiencies.
You really can't.
You can't just yell at Tony, the machinist, or the robots, or Herbie to just work harder.
No, you have to look at the flow of the entire system, find your constraint, and subordinate absolutely everything else to the pace of that constraint.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but the core lessons are incredibly powerful.
They are. We've seen that traditional efficiency metrics, particularly how we account for inventory, can actively push a business toward failure.
Yeah, we learned that the only true goal of a business is making money, which must be tracked through throughput, inventory, and operational expense.
And we discovered that attempting to perfectly balance capacity to demand will cause a system to collapse because in any sequence of events, slowness accumulates while speed does not.
So, to you listening right now, I want you to really audit your own workday, your team, or your business. Where are you churning out polished rocks just to look busy?
Are you spending hours optimizing a process that doesn't actually increase your ultimate throughput?
Where is your inventory, whether that's raw materials, unread emails, or unfinished code, just piling up?
Yeah.
Who or what is your Herbie?
And when you find your Herbie, remember the lesson of the Boy Scout hike. Don't just yell at the constraint to move faster. Figure out what's in their backpack and help carry the load.
I love that. And I want to leave you with one final counterintuitive idea to mull over based on everything we've explored today.
Lay it on us.
If attempting to perfectly balance capacity to demand inherently leads to failure and rising inventory, does that mean a healthy, profitable system must have built-in inefficiencies?
That's an interesting thought.
Right. Might having certain people or machines intentionally doing nothing, like actual scheduled idle time, be the hidden secret to reaching the goal? Keep that in mind the next time you pull into the parking lot, see that crimson Mercedes, and feel the urge to just look busy.